Last fall I built this camper for my e-bike, and now it's the middle of winter. So in this video I'm making some modifications to it so I can pull it behind my snowmobile and finally make camping a 4-season hobby for me. Come along as I build, test, break, and improve my bike camper, and I try it out on a real camping trip. It's the middle of winter in the middle of Canada, and that means my outdoors time right now is pretty much zero. But I'm tired of letting the weather stop me for 5 months of the year. In the fall, I built this really lightweight foam and fiberglass camper for my e-bike, but I haven't even really got the chance to use it yet because of the timing of the seasons. And since I haven't spent any meaningful time outside in months, I'm going to convert this into something usable for the winter. So first, I'm just removing the aluminum frame so that I can make some modifications to it. By the way, I made a really detailed video on how I built this entire camper, and the link's up in the top corner right now. So I have these 2 plastic snowmobile skis, and basically what I'm going to be doing is just welding up some sort of brackets that I can mount these skis onto the original aluminum frame of the camper. So I'm making this bracket out of some 1-inch steel tubing, and I chose to use steel because my aluminum welding skills are really not great, and I'm a lot more comfortable with steel. And since this part's going to be removable and it'll only be used when it's being pulled by the snowmobile, I'm not really worried about the extra weight that the steel's going to bring, so I'd rather have its extra strength. So I cut some pieces with my chop saw, and then I use my angle grinder to clean up the edges before welding. To do the welding, I have this flux core welder that I got probably 5 or 6 years ago for $200 at Canadian Tire. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that welding is definitely not my strong suit, but look out, because that looks pretty f***ing okay to me. I almost don't even need a grinder. After I have the main body of the bracket completed, I had to measure the gap between the mount of the skis and the mounts on the frame. Then I cut up some pieces of tubing to those lengths, less about 3/8 of an inch. And I'm going to cap them on the end with this 1/8 inch thick steel flat bar that I cut into some 1-inch squares. With both ends capped off, I grinded down the welds flush with the tubing, and then marked the center point on both ends and punched it. Then I drilled through a pilot hole, and then for the 2 longer pieces that connect onto the aluminum frame, I'm drilling through with this 3/8 inch bit. And then I have some of this 3/8 inch threaded rod that I'm going to cut about 1.5 inches longer than the pieces themselves. And then I'm going to feed this through both holes with an even overhang on both sides and tack weld it in place. Now I have this skateboard truck looking thing, and it'll fit right into the mounting slots on the frame and secured with some 3/8 inch nuts. I made 2 of these pieces the same size and welded both of them onto the top points of the bracket. For the shorter piece that's going to connect to the ski, I did basically the same thing, but I drilled through with a 1/2 inch bit instead of 3/8 and then just left it open. And then this will connect into the ski with a 1/2 inch stainless bolt. And with that bracket finished up, I made another one almost the exact same, just with slightly wider top pieces that'll fit into the frame where they need to. Now I have to make a couple modifications to the frame to fit these. I basically just have to add some more axle mounting plates that will accept the steel pieces I just made. So to make these plates, I have the same 3 inch by 1/4 inch aluminum flat bar that I used when I made the frame in the last video. And I'm just cutting out some 2.5 inch sections of this. And then I'm drilling through an axle sized hole. And using a cutoff wheel and my grinder, I extended the width of that hole out towards the bottom of the plate so the axles can drop out freely. Then I repeated this step 7 more times for my 8 total mounting plates I need. I clamped these plates into the rough position and then slowly adjusted them until the bracket would slide freely in and out of it. And now they're ready to weld. To weld the aluminum, I'm using a MIG welder with argon shielding gas, set up the exact same way as I set it up in the first video where I built the camper. And there's some of those professional aluminum welding skills I was talking about. Very uniform. With all 8 mounting plates welded up and grinded down and both brackets fitting nicely, the frame can be fitted back onto the camper with some stainless steel lag bolts. And then I'm giving both brackets a good coat of primer and then some black rust paint. After that dried for a day, these are ready to be mounted onto the trailer. These just pop right into the mounting plates and then use 4 nuts to secure in place. And they're removable at any time, which makes this an easy 5-minute transition between an e-bike camper and a snowmobile camper. Now I have to solve the heat problem, since it's usually about -5 to -20 on any given day at this time of year. I have this 50 caliber ammo can that you can get pretty much anywhere. And I'm going to make this into a small, efficient oil burning furnace that'll sit right on the shelf inside the camper and is removable, so it'll only be in there for the winter months. This isn't really an original idea, it's my own twist on some other videos that are floating around right now. So first I'm removing the rubber gasket from the underside of the lid. And then using a stepped drill bit, I'm drilling a couple holes to fit these copper fittings, one that'll be for the air intake and one for the exhaust. The hole I'm drilling now is the intake hole, and it's for a 3/4 inch copper fitting. The hole I'm drilling here at the top is slightly larger for the exhaust, and it's a 1-inch copper fitting. Now I want to cut a square hole into the lid so that I can install some of this tempered glass as a window so I can see how the fire's doing and how much oil is left. Ideally I would use ceramic glass for this, but I don't really think it's going to get that hot, and I couldn't get my hands on any in the time that I needed it. And tempered glass should be safe up to 200 degrees Celsius, and I highly doubt the glass is going to get any hotter than that, so it should be fine. The easiest place I could find some tempered glass panels is just to head to the thrift store, and I found this picture frame that had 2 glass panels pretty much right around the size I needed. I also have no proper tool to cut glass, so I got out my tile saw and just went really slow, and that actually seemed to work really well. Once it was cut, I also used the blade as a grinding stone to take off the sharp edge. Next I marked out 4 bolt holes, and then I have this 3/16 inch glass and tile bit that I'm going to drill through the glass with. I used a rag soaked in water to keep some water flowing over the drill bit at all times, and then tried to cut these holes with no idea if I was doing it right. I still got this on. Bit of a chip off. So after I broke the first good panel, I found the key was to go slow without applying too much pressure, and make sure you have a good solid piece of backing plywood so that there's even pressure over the whole panel. Each hole took me about 3 or 4 minutes to drill, using really only the weight of the impact itself as the pressure. But believe me, slow and steady is better. Then I used a cut-off wheel to cut off the handle on the lid. And a grinding wheel to grind off the remaining tabs. Then I marked out where the window was going to go and drew some lines about 3/4 inches set in. Then I went ahead and cut that out with the cut-off wheel. After I drilled the holes for the bolts, I used a sanding wheel on my grinder to take the paint off the bottom of the stove, so that I can weld some legs on. To make up the legs, I'm using some 3/4 inch steel tubing, but you can really use any tubing you have lying around that's going to elevate this box off the shelf a little bit. So I welded up 2 of these U's, and then I'm drilling a 1/4 inch hole through each one so that I can bolt this into the shelf in the camper. And then I'm welding in this cross-member piece of tubing. After giving the leg piece a quick grind and sand, I'm tacking it on to the bottom of the ammo can. You also have to turn down your wire speed quite a bit on your welder so that you don't burn through the thin metal of the can. But don't ask me how I know that. Now I want to take off the original paint because it's not going to be heat proof. So to do that, I started up a nice hot fire with a bunch of scrap wood. And then I just set the ammo can in the fire, and it only takes about 30 seconds before you have to flip it. And once you flip it, you can see that a lot of the paint has pretty much released itself from the steel. Now after it cools down, I can just take it into my workbench and use a wire wheel in my drill and a good wire brush, and this paint comes off really easily. It takes about 5 minutes to do the whole can. Then I cleaned off any remaining dust with some mineral spirits, reassembled it, and gave it a few coats of some high heat spray paint on the inside and outside. So basically how this is going to work is the air intake is going to come in from the side of the camper right here, and then it's going to exhaust through the top, and then there's going to be a candle burning, and then I'm going to make a heat exchanger out of some 1-inch copper pipe that sucks in room air from the camper and then blows it out, hopefully quite a bit hotter. So first I have some of this stove and gasket cement that I'm going to use to fix all my copper pieces together, since solder won't really work when it's under heat. So I cut the holes for my heat exchanger pipes. And then I cut a couple lengths of some copper tubing using a pipe cutter. I used a liberal amount of stove cement to cement the pipes into place. And then I added on this elbow and little length of pipe for the intake so that it was sucking up colder air from down below the heater. After the cement hardened up, I added on this elbow onto the heat exchanger exhaust, and I didn't cement this in place so that I can change the direction of the airflow. I 3D printed up this mounting bracket for a little USB fan, and after bolting the two together, this just slips on to the end of the intake pipe and then forces air up through the heat exchanger. Now back to that lid I kind of skipped over there. I have some of this fiberglass fireproof gasket that I'm going to use to replace that rubber gasket I took out. And then I'm just using a thin bead of stove cement around the frame of the window, and then bolting it in place. To make an easy oil candle, I just took an old salsa jar and drilled 4 holes in the lid for these wick holders. Then I filled it up with some paraffin lamp oil, and you can get this stuff for like $14 or $15 for a gallon. And that's it. With the flame right on the heat exchanger pipes, this keeps the hottest part of the pipes at about 150 degrees Celsius. Then I installed the air intake and exhaust fittings, and just popped in a couple placeholder pipes so that I can move this into the camper and trace out where I'm going to have to drill the holes for the air intake and exhaust. So I drilled them out with the proper size hole saw to fit this 1-inch male by 3/4 inch female brass bulkhead fitting. I put a liberal amount of silicone around the hole and then just installed the fitting by feeding it through from the outside and then tightening down the nut from the inside. Then I just finished up the fittings and pipe for the air intake and exhaust. I cemented all of these joints except for the ones that connect each pipe to the stove itself. That way all I have to do to install the furnace is thread each pipe onto its bulkhead and then slide the stove right into place. This isn't going to be 100% airtight, but it should be like 99%. And the oil I'm burning is paraffin, which actually can be used indoors, so this is going to be fine. I also pre-drilled the holes in the shelf to bolt the stove into place. Removing the stove for the summertime is really easy. I just have to take the bolts out, slide the stove out of place and unthread the pipes, and then plug the two bulkheads with some 3/4 inch plugs. I'm just powering the heat exchanger fan with the main power bank for the camper. And after letting it run for only about 10 minutes, it brought the temperature of the camper up from the ambient shop temperature of 8 degrees all the way up to 18. So we'll see how this does when we're actually facing some real cold temperatures. Couple more things, I threaded in an elbow to make a little smokestack with a removable cap, and an elbow for the air intake so wind doesn't blow in as much. Also, the candle I made was really hard to adjust the wicks, and as a result it smoked a lot and caused a lot of buildup on the heater. So I got some of these adjustable wick holders and made up 2 new candles. These are a lot nicer because you can just use the knob on the side to adjust the height of the wick to find a nice stable flame with no smoke. And finally, I just took a scrap piece of styrofoam and cut some snug holes for these candles, so that I can just set this on the shelf in the camper for when I'm traveling so the candles aren't bouncing and leaking everywhere. Now I'm nearly ready to go, but I've got to get it hooked up to my brand new sled. So I cut 2 pieces of 1/4 inch steel flat bar, and then I have one of these hitch mounts that fits the hitch that's on the camper, and I sanded off as much of the paint as I could, and then I welded it on to one of the flat bars. Then I clamped the 2 pieces together and drilled through a pilot hole on all 4 corners. And then drilled the holes to fit some 1/4 inch bolts. Then I gave the Makota some primer and paint. Once that dried, I put on a couple strips of this grippy tape that's usually meant just to hold area rugs in place. And then these 2 pieces just clamp around the back handrail on the snowmobile. And that's it for this build. It's time to load up and head out into the snow. Unfortunately, shortly after I started this build, we started having unseasonably warm temperatures, and a lot of rain, which melted our couple feet of snow in short order. Luckily, after waiting for a few days, the snow finally returned, and though it's not anything monumental, it's good enough and cold enough to try out my camper. Overall, I'm pretty impressed. This thing is actually handling great. It turns really well and follows nice and close behind the sled, and you don't even really feel it pulling because of the light weight, even with this little 440. The aluminum frame seems to be holding up great and handling all the bumps and thumps just fine. Or maybe not. I was trying to go through a pretty rough section with some speed to show just how durable this unit is. And turns out I wasn't wrong, because even after this blow, everything else is still in perfect condition. But I am going to have to re-weld this main tongue joint with probably a quite a bit higher wire speed, because it looks like the weld barely even penetrated this. So after I pulled it back just over 1 kilometer to the shop holding it with one hand, I quickly re-welded that joint and we're back on the road. By the way, all the audio for this last guitar part was recorded inside the camper later on this night. So I'm starting up the fire just before dark, and our starting temperatures are -10 outside and -8 inside the camper. Alright, it's been about 15 minutes since I started it. After about an hour and a half, it hit 12 degrees, which is 24 degrees Celsius higher than the outside temperature, making this a perfectly viable solution to heat a camper. One thing I'd change in the future is adding an air circulation fan for the cabin so that all the heat doesn't sit up near the top. And now it's time to relax and get a good night's sleep. At about 2 a.m. I had to refill the candles, so overall used just under about a half liter of the oil, or about $3 or $4 worth. In the morning, I can just turn off the airflow to put out the candles. And then it's time to load up and head back. Overall, this was a really cool build and a really rewarding night out in the woods. The ammo can heater provided all the warmth I needed for the night with just a good thick blanket. And the new ski adaptation makes this the world's first snowmobile bike camper that's good for 4 seasons. I really hope you enjoyed watching me build this and coming on my camping adventure with me. If you like these kind of videos, I build a lot of different random stuff, so hit that subscribe button and come with me on my next journey. Also, if you recall from the first video, I was talking about giving this away or selling it and donating a portion of the profits. I decided I'm not going to get rid of this since the frame broke and it's kind of a liability to sell to anybody. What I am going to do instead though is donate $2,000 to a better tent city in Waterloo, Ontario, which gives homeless people a good warm place to stay and a roof over their head, and all their information is on their website that's on the screen now. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.